In this programme, we look at the programme. Couldn't be any more confusing if I tried. The programme is a feature film about Lance Armstrong's Tour de France career and doping, in particular the US postal cycling team, and how they controlled and dominated the press.
Immersive sports science, content not commentary, sports science, not bro science.
Now I graded this film at a 77.29 and here is the scientific reasoning why.
In this series we review, critique and analyse whilst expanding upon the sports science of popular sport books and docu-films. In this video we review the 2015 programme. The programme is a dramatisation of Lance Armstrong, played by Ben Foster's Tour de France career, and the efforts by an Irish sports journalist for the Times newspaper, David Walsh, no, not that David, who is played by Chris O'Dowd, as well as other attempts to expose Lance Armstrong and the ways in which Lance Armstrong controlled the media, controlled those within his circle, and also tried to control the narrative. Or in other words, utilising his power to exploit and bully and lie. Now, for people who don't quite know who Lance Armstrong was, Lance Armstrong was a 7-time Tour de France winner, with an asterisk next to his achievements, cancer survivor, and the founder of the Lance Armstrong Foundation and the charity Livestrong. He was docked his 7 Tour de France championships after it turned out that he was in fact doping in order to win them. The information within the programme seemed fairly accurate, give or take a few times where the director had utilised their own dramatical licence. Or shall I say a creative licence. For instance, some of the events happened in the wrong timeline. This was a programme operated a linear timeline, but yet some of the happenings seemed to happen multiple times and happened in the wrong time. So for instance, one of the events was moved from 2004 to 2003.
Ferrari. I have the money and the power to destroy you.
Also amazing how some of the actors actually looked like the people they were meant to be playing, with some notable exceptions such as Dustin Hoffman. As mentioned previously, this was a fairly accurate retelling of the Lance Armstrong story. This is remarkable as it only came out in 2015, a few years after the Lance Armstrong scandal had become apparent. Historians often argue that it takes roughly around about 30 years before we know the true picture of an event and we have the full facts surrounding it. Yes, the pictures we get from closer to the event compared to after the event are a lot different. Things become distorted over time, and that we often put our own perspectives from the morals of our own times upon these particular events or situations, instead of asking the questions in context. It's also linked heavily to the concept of the flawed icon. I realise that many of you watching this are going to totally misconstrue anything as I say, but what Lance Armstrong did to many was morally repugnant. At the same time, as the saying goes, many people who go down in history are certainly not saints. Positive for waiting so long to get the information out for us to hopefully understand it is that at the time the emotions of that situation can often be raw and they can cloud our judgment, although the rawness and the emotion can help us understand the meaning of it within context. Another advantage of retelling the information so close to the event is that over time we suffer from degradation of information, which usually happens in a 7-year period. Obviously this depends on the context and the type of information being stated, whether that information becomes lost and how that information is received in the future. Thus, there are many different versions of reality. Yes, I know that sounds like very smoky, weedy, hippie kind of stuff. Everyone's perception of truth is different. That's what I mean by it. It is also relative. And that truth isn't necessarily fact. It does not excuse what Lance Armstrong has done. However, many dopers like Lance Armstrong have utilised this undeniable fact of reality for their own benefits, or to misconstrue or to spread fake news as such. The film starts by documenting Lance Armstrong in Belgium in 1994 when he was with Team Motorola. I felt that this film gave an oversimplistic view of doping, in that it was like the haves and haves not, and yes, to a certain extent that is correct. That's why it's unfair. That's why it's one of the reasons why it's against the WADA's ruling.
See that guy over there? That guy, and probably that guy. They've got more red cells in their blood, more oxygen. You can't win.
Epo? Epigen?
Yes,
That's what this man wants. Wanna see?
Daria? So, how much would you like?
It gave the perception that if I take drugs, suddenly I'll be really good at the sport. When that's not the case, you have to apply it to a program. Yes, the program's called program, but you have to apply it to the drug taking program, the training program, a full holistic approach, if so to speak. You don't just take roids and suddenly become a world champion. You've got to bear in mind that other people may be on drugs, and you've also got to do the training as well. And yes, I know some of you are going to mention, what about Mount Verto? Otherwise known colloquially as that fucking mountain. Likewise, he probably had the training in order to do it, and the drugs, just simply the EPO if you like, supplemented his performance on that day. But more about that when we review the Armstrong Lie documentary. I felt it gave the perception that he wasn't doping, wasn't that good, to suddenly doping and you're absolutely awesome. There are so many extenuating variables to mention. This can be shown in the documentary Icarus. There are athletes out there who are outliers, so to speak. They don't perform well when they are doping. Now this may be due to other extenuating factors such as anxiety, fear of being caught, or it could be the fact that they are just simply non-responders. Of course, the opposite is also true. There are also a number of hypersensitive responders. One thing that's also neglected when it comes to the information regarding doping is the effect on the athlete's well-being and mental health. This could potentially lead into such things as eating disorders, as many bike racers have. Eating disorders is often seen as the last taboo in sport, especially in men.
We also have to take into account those who may be listening and watching, their mental states, and the nuances in which they look at evidence. But in cycling, there is a great attitude to try and get yourself thin as possible. That you can increase your muscle output, but decrease your weight. In theory, you go faster, and that goes across all different types of sports. Athletics is another prime example. However, in cycling, and I know what I'm about to say is anecdotal evidence, but when I've spoken to riders themselves, and them stating that all it really is they want you to be anorexic. Yes, that is anecdotal. But with that feeling, I have to get thin to improve my performance, can lead to controlling behaviours by others. Being told you need to lose weight when you're already practically anorexic is not good advice and not good for one's mental health. And this practice is highly unethical. The reason why I got my shirt off here is to explain that, well, I am quite lean, and that telling someone like myself to try and lose more body fat won't necessarily help me with my muscle output necessarily. Yet again, it depends on the sport, depends on the activity, and also depends on what you are trying to achieve.
I don't mind the caffeine, but the cream is gonna make you fat. Don't fuck with my investment.
Simply using a blanket term that you are too fat, for instance, is not helpful, because some athletes need that build, they need that muscle output. And that's where we go back to that again. The amount of power your muscles can produce compared to how light you are will increase that force times mass production. In other words, you go faster. But that only works if you're not breaking down your muscle in order to try and achieve that lighter weight. Everybody's optimum weight is different regarding sport. What you kind of see in sport is a body composition Darwinism come out to play. That doesn't necessarily mean you do get exceptions to those rules, because obviously you do. But generally, a person's body type and the genes they have push them towards a certain role or even a certain sport, and it gives them the abilities to perform better at that sport as they are more specific to their body type, body needs, and a body's abilities to be able to meet those demands.
Your ratio is all wrong. Power to weight. Lots of power, but too much of this is not best for the mountains.
Perception of Dr. Ferrari was quite an interesting one. It was very stereotypical. It was almost they made him look like Dr. X, the evil doctor.
It was like a vision, a heavenly vision, when God spoke to Paul.
However, he was described by one New York Times journalist as a very knowledgeable man, but yet the most boring person alive. I should imagine the director utilised this narrative in order to sell the character better to the audience. Mad scientist gone rogue, a much more sellable narrative than someone talking about nuance and context. However, you have to answer, why is the doctor utilising this situation? Why are they trying to make their athletes dope? Is it because they got shady past? Is it because they can't work as a doctor? Is it because they found a niche for themselves to earn extra money unethically? Because doping is illegal in many countries and often shady if not, it can often lead to abuse of power and power structures involved that prey potentially on the most vulnerable.
I like malignant cells trying to take over my body. I like some fool trying to take me down because I go faster, I don't die, and I will not be brought down.
This can create a sense of omerta, which is a code of silence often brought about by fear of being outed for doping or a fear of not being able to get jobs. Armstrong utilised the omerta in order to keep his secret hidden and to put down anyone who was willing to stand up against him. If not, he would force lawsuits upon them, as in the Floyd Landis case, where they wouldn't take him on because they perceived him to be a toxic product, even though everyone else on the team was doping. This is where the Floyd Landis incident is slightly inconsistent to the way some of the documentaries have shown it to be. They've shown Floyd Landis as being upset but quiet regarding Lance Armstrong's direct involvement in him being selected for the team. However, apparently very angry about himself not being selected to the team, regardless of Lance Armstrong's own input or not. This, according to the 30/30 documentary, led Floyd Landis to become a whistleblower. They could have explained how the Doministe and the Dominiques work, which they only vaguely touched upon as a way of showing Lance Armstrong's power, crafted the US Postal team in his likeness, in his image, and to be able to show a nice formation on the Top Gear runway.
I want racers who serve the team before. It's going to be a collaborative effort with manufacturers, sponsors, technicians. What are you doing?
The best philosophical information noted in the film was the actual journalist debates themselves.
Look, I just don't think a man who's been through that kind of illness would then risk putting potentially dangerous drugs into his body.
Some people choose to dope because of an injury, illness, wanting to get back to performing better. Maybe they are underperforming or they feel like they are underperforming and therefore need the drugs in order to reach that potential they were meant to be.
Here we are, 1 year on in the Tour of Renewal, and the average racing speed has gone up. Lance Armstrong, handsome young cancer survivor, the inspirer of millions, cannot possibly be a cheat because that would reveal the world to be a great pile of shit.
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
WADA has three main arguments against doping. Those arguments are based around integrity, natural performance, and protecting the athletes from harm.
Because as much as I like the Tour, I have no interest in going up a mountain to watch chemists compete. His best finish on a mountain stage was 39, but now he's a man transformed into the finest climber I've ever seen. He's recovered from cancer and turned into bloody Superman.
We should always be skeptical yet careful when people do these amazing performances, because there's always other extenuating variables why they potentially achieved it.
Even if Armstrong was doping, he couldn't possibly hide it.
John, nobody's going to say anything. Nobody wants to ruin the party. Just let the sponsors roll in. Hey, if the winners are all cheats, fuck it.
So when it comes to critiquing film that's different to normal documentaries that we will normally do on this channel, we have to tell the story via the use of the film itself, the artwork, the artistic ways in which they introduce the characters, rather than necessarily utilizing a narrator or the actual voices of the characters themselves to explain how they work and feel. So this actually makes it a lot more difficult, because then we have to utilize our own intuition to deduce what the producer or the director is trying to show through camera work, as well as camera angles, as well as other things that may be slightly subtle. Action shots helped us not only make the film look cool, it helps us bring us into the action. It's a sporting film anyway, so you kind of expect those kind of shots, but it's how they do it. It's trying to bring you into the mindset of Lance Armstrong, bring into the struggles that Lance Armstrong is facing, or the struggles he's putting onto other people while he's facing. And these handheld cameras moving action helps to bring us into that action in particular by giving us a personal first eye view of the world that Lance Armstrong is in. There was a gradual subtle change in the camera angle as it looked upon Lance Armstrong. Earlier on in the film it looked down upon him, whereas when he gained more power it looked up at him more. Even when he was at the end he'd been found out for drugs. When he was at his most vulnerable they generally looked down upon him in order to demonstrate or show this vulnerability. Another way of showing the story was through the actors' own personalities on the screen.
Ever take banned substances to enhance your cycling performance?
Yes. The programme follows the tour career of Lance Armstrong and a Times journalist intent on bringing him down. Although the accuracy is remarkable how close to the film was to the downfall of Lance Armstrong, there were some glaring historical continuity errors. The film could also be accused of romanticising the Lance Armstrong story. All in all, I give this film a score of 77.29.